Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Krishna
participation. Enthusiastic. So my name is Krishna Kripa Das, and I came in touch with this spiritual practice.
My rubber bands on.
I came in touch with this spiritual practice 43 years ago. I came in touch with this spiritual practice 43 years ago.
43?
Good gracious.
And I'm still finding new knowledge and new pleasure in it. And I decided to title this talk "The Science of Krishna Consciousness." So I was a science major in school, so science was something that I was interested in. Sometimes there's a couple of different things in terms of like spiritual things in science. Some people think being spiritual means doing whatever you feel like doing. So, and then other people consider feeling like doing something spiritual is following some rigid dogma that you have to have blind faith in. So, in this presentation we'll show that it's not a question of following some blind dogma, and it's not a question of doing whatever you feel like doing. But it's a matter of it is a science, and it's actually a science that a science where we experiment on our own consciousness. So it's more exciting science in one sense than just experimenting on some old bones or something. And it's a science that you can verify. Actually, the scientists are very proud of having objective knowledge, but if you think about it, a lot of their objective knowledge we can actually verify ourselves. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is a science where you can actually perform the experiment on yourself and get some realization. So what's in common between us and science? Well, in science and in this practice of Krishna consciousness, we accept knowledge by hearing from an authority. If you go to the university and you study science, you'll hear from somebody called a professor. And basically you hear what the professor has to say and you accept this as truth. So in Krishna consciousness, you approach a guru and you hear from the guru about spiritual knowledge and you accept what the guru says is true. So why do you accept a professor? Because he's teaching at a college that's accredited, because he has a PhD, he was taught by a professor himself. And so why do we accept a guru? Well, a guru is a person who was actually trained up by his own guru, and actually is somebody who's actually following, he's actually what's called an acharya, or someone who practices what he's teaching. The Sanskrit word achar means behavior. So one of the qualities of a guru is he's an acharya. He actually, the instructions that he's giving out, he actually applies in his own life, and therefore he has some realization of them, and therefore we're inspired to hear from him because he has somebody who's got some realization from his practice. Actually, in the Bhagavad Gita, the first verse that I ever learned 43 years ago, on a devotee named Mahaprabhu, who actually organizes our Rath Yatra. We have a big festival the second Saturday of June called Rath Yatra, and one of the big organizers is this guy Mahaprabhu, who taught me this verse from Bhagavad Gita 43 years ago. Tadvidi pranipatena pariprajnena sevya upadekshanti te gyanam gyaninas tattvadarshina. So this Krishna, who is the speaker of Bhagavad Gita and the goal of Bhagavad Gita, is saying, just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, inquire from him submissively, and render service unto him. A self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he's seen the truth. So, of course, that's sort of there in the science class. You serve the guru by paying the professor by paying his tuition, and the university pays. So that's your service to your professor, and you also inquire from a professor, and you also have some submission to the professor in the sense that you accept him as knowing, having actual knowledge more than you do, and you feel that you're actually going to come out ahead by hearing from this professor because he has mastery of the subject that you don't have. So in addition to the professor, there are other people in the same field. Let's take physics, for example. In addition to your physics professor, there are other physics teachers in the physics department, and there's people who've written books on physics and papers on physics, and there's peer-reviewed journals on physics. So not only do you have a professor, but there's other learned people in the field. So in Krishna consciousness, we have our own spiritual teacher, our guru, but there's also other people who've been engaged in the practice for many years and have some realizations of the value and truth of the practice, who are also people we get knowledge from and confirm the knowledge we got from our guru. So then another thing that science and Krishna consciousness have in common is authorized literature, texts. So in science class you have a textbook, and there's articles from peer-reviewed journals, and these are accepted as authorized knowledge in the field that everybody considers authentic. And so we take the knowledge from these textbooks and journals. So in Krishna consciousness we have revealed literature, like Bhagavad Gita, which is our main book. Sometimes we have the books on display. There's Bhagavad Gita over there. So So in this Vedic tradition, there's actually hundreds of thousands of verses, and this Bhagavad Gita, it's valuable because it's a summary of the full body of literature, and it's spoken by Krishna, who is the source of all knowledge, actually, and the goal of all knowledge, which he mentions in one verse, Bhagavad Gita. Very powerful verse, 15:15. Sarvasya chaham hridisani visto. I'm seated in everyone's heart. Sarvasya chaham hridisani visto. Matasmitra gyanam apohanam cha. From me comes remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. Vedaischa saver aham eva vedo. This entire body of revealed literature from India, collectively called the Vedas, by this knowledge, I'm who's meant to be known. And then the last verse, Vedanta Veda Eva Chaham, I am the knower of the Vedas and the compiler of the Vedanta. So this person who's speaking the Bhagavad Gita is the same person who's seated in our heart, giving knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. So that's how authoritative the Bhagavad Gita is. And there's other literatures also in the Vedic tradition that we study. This Bhagavad Gita is 700 verses. There's another one we study after we understand the basic truth of the Gita. We study something called Srimad Bhagavatam, which is 18,000 verses, which goes into the subject matter in greater detail. Yeah?
Could you say the name again?
Yeah, Srimad Bhagavatam. Yeah. Srimad means beautiful, and Bhagavatam means something in relationship to God. Bhagavan is a name for God, meaning that person who possesses all opulence. God is He's all-knowing, He's all-powerful, He's all-famous. Everyone's heard of God. The atheists have heard of God. The agnostics have heard of God. He is a very, very popular guy. People have different opinions about him, but everyone's heard of him practically. There's practically no one who's not heard of him. So he's the most beautiful person. We may not know, in many of the Western traditions, God is described, the impersonal feature of God is described. And in the impersonal feature of God, we don't hear much about His beauty. But if we saw God in person, according to the Vedic understanding, God has a personal feature and an impersonal feature. And His personal feature is a reservoir of all beauty. We would be enchanted by the beautiful form of God. And then renunciation. So although God has everything, actually He's not attached to anything, which is sort of an amazing thing, because we are generally very much attached to whatever we possess. But God, although He possesses everything, is not actually attached to it. And then there's 6 of them, and it's also hard to remember all of them. There's knowledge, renunciation, there's strength is the other one. God is the strongest person. Omnipotent is what God is famous for, being omnipotent. So Srimad Bhagavatam is the beautiful story about things in relationship with God, the service of God, the devotees of God, the philosophy of God. In the Bhagavad Gita, you have one guru, Krishna, speaking to one disciple, Arjuna. But in the course of the Srimad Bhagavatam, we hear many different gurus speaking to many different disciples. And some of these gurus are incarnations of God, and some are pure devotees of God. So you hear the same teachings with different nuances and different presentations, so you get more of a feel for how to actually apply them. And you see how people, in the Bhagavatam, you see how people apply these teachings and came out victorious, and you can see how they misapplied the teachings and got themselves into trouble. So there's both good examples and bad examples in the Bhagavatam. In the Bhagavad Gita, we just have one good example, Arjuna, who actually assimilated the knowledge and acted according to it. Then the other thing is, both in science and Krishna consciousness, there's opportunity to verify knowledge through experiment. So when we study science in school, often there's some theoretical knowledge, and then there's it's given in the class, and then they have a lab, and you're supposed to follow certain instructions on the lab, and you're supposed to replicate some experiment that was done years ago that established some principle. And presumably, if you follow the instructions in the lab, you'll get the result, and you confirm its truth. So that's also there in Krishna consciousness. We can chant the Hare Krishna mantra, and we can get different realizations from chanting. We can get detachment from material things. We can get attachment to spiritual things, and we can see this attachment, spiritual attachment, growing, and we can see our material detachment growing as we practice the chanting. So it's something you don't have to. Somebody doesn't have to tell you that you're making advancement, but you can see that you're becoming more attached to spiritual things and less attached to material things. And actually, it's easier to have verification of some of these spiritual truths in the practice of Krishna consciousness than it is in science. For example, there's a field of science called particle physics. And they talk about different, when we grew up, they talked about things like, old people like me, when we grew up, they talked about electrons, neutrons, and protons, right? But then in the course of time, they built these huge devices called particle accelerators, and they're able to give evidence for all kinds of things like quarks and leptons and many, many things. You can look at them online. So you can study particle physics and you hear these things talked about, neutrons, electrons, protons, quarks, leptons, and people who study physics, they have faith in the existence of these things, right? But no one's ever seen an electron, no one's seen a proton, or to speak of a quark or a lepton, which are even smaller. But everyone has faith that they're real, right? So in Krishna consciousness, we talk about the soul and we talk about the supreme soul, right? But we can't see the soul and the supreme soul. But that's not a problem, because there's zillions of things in science that no one has ever seen, but they have faith that they exist. So anyone can verify the existence of these atomic particles if they have billions of dollars to build a particle accelerator, and if they're willing to become a PhD in physics, which really eliminates a large number of people. But actually, anyone can attain spiritual perfection by practicing the instructions in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam without any previous qualification. Actually, there's one verse in Bhagavad Gita. Once upon a time, I memorized chapter 4 of Bhagavad Gita. So for the last month, I was reviewing it. And there's one verse that goes, Api chet asi papebhya sarvebhya papakritama sarvagyan playedavayapa vijnanam santarishisi. It's number 436. And it makes a very amazing statement. Krishna says, even if you're the most sinful of all sinners, if you're situated on the boat of transcendental knowledge, you can cross over the ocean of miseries. So you can't be so degraded that you can't apply the spiritual practice and attain perfection. That's what's being made. You just have to situate yourself on the boat of transcendental knowledge. And this transcendental knowledge is available through these scriptures and from these gurus. So that's basically my presentation, that Krishna consciousness is a science. Then I was going to talk about some of the theoretical aspects of the science and some of the practical applications of the science. Does anybody have any question about what I said so far? Okay. One at a time. I guess you.
How is Krishna not attached to nothing?
How is he not attached to? Well, he demonstrates it in different pastimes. Like for example, Bhagavad Gita is talking about the relationship between Krishna and Arjuna. So Krishna's the relationship has different aspects. Krishna is the guru of Arjuna, and Arjuna is the disciple. But Arjuna is also the warrior, and Krishna is the chariot driver. So God he's number one, right? He's like, but he's taking this humble position as a chariot driver. He could have arranged the Bhagavad Gita in such a way that he came out as the big hero. You know, everyone was glorifying Krishna for winning the battle, killing all these people. But no, even though he could easily have done everything, he wanted to give his devotee, Arjuna, credit. So that's and not only that, he renounced his prestigious position of being the supreme lord and the guru of all living entities to act as a chariot driver, which is not a very prestigious position. It's like a taxi driver.
Pretty much. That's pretty accurate.
I mean, it's a step up because you get some credit for helping
It's
on the war.
a taxi driver, but it's still a taxi.
Yeah, so that's in one sense. That's one way you can describe his renunciation. Even though he's the supreme being and deserves all credit for all amazing things that are done, he gives the credit to his devotee because he wants him glorified, because he's such a nice guy. Yeah, so I think you were next, weren't you?
Oh, I thought.
Okay.
I have raised my hand.
Okay, no, you can go first then.
Nah,
I
you go first.
You
ready?
Oh, for real? I can't miss it.
You go. Why? Exactly.
Oh, so you're choosing. Okay. My question was, if you could repeat the translation of the last saying that you had said.
Oh, the verse, yeah. Even if you're considered to be the most sinful of all sinners, you can cross over the ocean of all miseries if you're situated on the boat of transcendental knowledge. So basically, if you acquire this transcendental knowledge, which is found in these books, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and you actually act according to it, you can dissolve all your karma, basically, because what's meant by basically, if you perform karma, means if you do something good, you get a good result, and if you do something bad, you get a bad result. So this verse is saying, even if you did more bad things than everybody else on the planet or everybody else in the universe, and you deserve to suffer for a very long time, although not eternity. This tradition doesn't have. There's no such thing as eternal damnation in Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam. So if you're looking for a tradition that doesn't, because for a finite number of mistakes, you can only suffer a finite number of time. You can't suffer eternally for a finite number of mistakes. It doesn't make a bit of sense, actually. at least from this tradition. So even though you're destined to have a lot of bad things coming to you because you dished out a lot of bad things, this acting in this transcendental knowledge is so purifying that you can actually become free from all the karma for all those bad things you did and attain the highest spiritual perfection. So it's a very encouraging thing. Yes?
So I wanted to point out something that I just realized. There's a verse in the Bible where it's like, just because, so basically one of the disciples, Peter, apostle,
Right.
he's having a dream, and what he dreams is a whole big ass sheet with just every single animal you could possibly imagine on it. And God tells him to eat it. And there's pigs, there's sheep, there's goats, there's turtles, there's frogs, there's everything. And Peter literally says, I'm not gonna eat all this because not all of it is clean. And God is like, don't call anything I have made unclean. All of it is good for you to eat. So I think that can be applied to like the different like belief systems too, because just because like one belief system doesn't always agree with yours doesn't mean you can still apply what those beliefs say to your own religion.
Yeah, well, there's truth in all the scriptures, and God provides scriptures to different people at different places and different times to move them in a positive direction.
And that's what he meant. He didn't mean like don't just eat, like don't be a vegetarian. He just meant like.
Well, the thing is, in the Genesis, he gives a vegetarian diet, and then in the kingdom of God, it said, the lion will lay down with the lamb. You know? So there's one Christian friend I was joking with her. Don't think you'll be eating lamb chops with Jesus in heaven.
You'll probably be eating vegan.
Yeah, because the kingdom of God is a place of non-violence, and the original diet given in the Bible and also in the Bhagavad Gita is and also in the Vedic tradition there's concessions for people who want to eat meat. You know? So I would say that's a concession in the Bible for people who want to eat meat, because there's some people aren't ready for the highest standard, so God has to provide another standard, and so they can move in a positive direction. You know? So usually the meeting is restricted in some ways, like used to be the Catholics wouldn't eat meat on Friday, for example. And
No fish.
Yeah.
Fish on Friday.
Fish on-
they'd eat
Fish
fish.
on Friday?
They'd eat fish, right? But they wouldn't eat the meat, right?
Wow. How is
I
that
don't
possible?
remember the fish.
The question is how is that possible?
They
How
eat
do
the
you not
bones.
eat fish?
And then there's like the Seventh-day Adventists. They advocate, vegetarianism based on the Bible. And the Mormons, they say that meat should be eaten sparingly only in the winter or a time of scarcity or something like that. So there's the idea of restricting. The idea is that basically the truth is thou shalt not kill. You know, so unnecessary killing is not a good thing. And therefore, there's some reaction from it.
See where I was raised on initially was like all the Old Testament, New Testament, like the King James style.
Right.
Whereas what I know now, it's like nothing is what it means anymore. Like you have you have two different sets of rules. You have the rules which God used to try to have a relationship with his people, only they saw it as him being totally impersonal and like, I'm gonna judge you if you don't do this, right? Whereas in the New Testament, you have a guy walking around saying you can have a relationship with God now, and people are confused, like, that's not possible, because the law clearly states, I'm not like you in any way. So to say that is like saying that you can have a relationship with the father who abandoned you a few years ago before you're born. It's saying that, but in more positive way, you know, like it's not all bad. Like God is basically saying, I'm here because I chose to have a relationship with you before. You kind of broke up with me, so I had to wait a few thousand years to rebuild that relationship. But in sending Jesus, that was sort of the promise ring, in a sense, that like gave us a second chance.
Yeah. Well, that's that. The understanding is that God is always sending representatives in scriptures at different times and different places to move us in a positive direction. And the more we take help from these, we'll see an improvement in our life, actually, because we'll become free from our karma and the bad things that we're destined to suffer for, we won't suffer for. Because if we perform acts of devotion to God, we get free from our karma. And that's mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. And so the more we can perform acts of devotion, the more we can experience freedom from our karma, actually.
You don't have to do it like a fire.
So it's time for another question.
I have a lot of difficulty with contradictions, get this cognitive dissonance, and like it makes spirituality very difficult.
Hmm.
Prabhupada
Yeah.
said, I've heard this philosophy about like you can cleanse your karma like that,
Right.
with spirituality. And then he also talks about the charlatan who just, because when you serve, you're supposed to be like not selfish. It's not
Right.
about you.
Hmm.
It's about serving. The servants of the servants of the servants.
Right.
And so then he talks about the charlatan who's just doing it for the purpose of cleansing his karma, of getting away with everything he did,
Hmm.
getting away with it.
Hmm.
That's where I see how do you know? You know, you want to clean your karma, you know what you've done wrong, but you don't want to be a charlatan either.
Oh yeah, there's different levels of devotion actually. There's in that book, the Srimad Bhagavatam, it talks about 4 different levels of someone who's actually a devotee of God. They understand that God is there and devotional services, acts of devotion to God are good to perform, but they're in different levels of consciousness. So it's a nice description actually. Devotional service executed by a person who is envious, proud, violent, and angry, and who's a separatist, is considered in the mode of darkness. So there are people who have some relationship with religion, but they also are proud, violent, and angry. Right? So God is saying those people are on the lowest level. And then worship of the deities in the temple by a separatist with a motive for material enjoyment, fame, and opulence is considered devotion in the mode of passion. So better than those people who are proud and violent, angry, and think they're better than everybody else, but they also claim to have a relationship with God and being acting in it. The next group is people who worship God to get ahead materially, to become famous, to become rich, to become powerful. So they're better than the people who worship God and are angry and violent and proud. And then the third level is when a devotee worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead and offers the results of his activities in order to free himself from the inebrities of fruitive activities. His devotion is in the mode of goodness. So if you understand that by acting out of devotion to God, you'll become free from your karma, and therefore you'll move in a spiritual direction and you'll move toward liberation and spiritual perfection, that's the best of all the material motivations. And then the stage of perfection of service to God is listed in 2 other verses. The manifestation of unadulterated devotional service is exhibited when one's mind is at once attracted to hearing the transcendental name and qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is residing in everyone's heart. Just as the water of the Ganges flows naturally down to the ocean, such devotional ecstasy, uninterrupted by any material condition, flows toward the Supreme Lord. So when one spontaneously serves God out of love for God, that's the goal. And by practicing acts of devotion, we can gradually come through those different stages, from the lowest to the second to the third, and then up to the highest stage. Because performing acts of devotion to God is purifying. So, and associating with people who are devoted to God is one of the key things to do to propel you in a positive direction, especially people who are more devoted to God than you are. The best, of course, people would be is to associate with the people who are on this level of spontaneous affection for God and who are completely devoted to His service, because that tendency which is there in the pure soul can be awakened in the association of such people. But still, it's better to associate with people who have some level of God consciousness than people who are actually ignoring God or working against God. Those would be the worst association for people wanting to dance. So is that helpful?
Very much. It's kind of starting to fall. It's still difficult, but it's kind of falling in place. The veil is deep. One more contradiction with it, and this I have a lot of problems. One question first is when they say service or sacrifice, do they ever do blood sacrifice?
That's not.
Because, you know, at one point they're talking about compassion and not killing, and then he's telling Arjuna,
Right.
it's okay, you're a warrior, you can go ahead and kill.
Right.
And that's another contradiction that
Right.
drives me.
Okay, we can answer those questions. It's not very difficult.
So,
The former ages there was animal sacrifice, but
Yeah.
according to the Vedic literatures, when the animal was sacrificed, it either got a new animal body or it was promoted immediately to be a human being. It didn't have to go through several lives as an animal. It immediately. So it wasn't like, you know, you're killing some, you know, animal in the slaughterhouse and eating it for dinner. You know, it was you actually benefited the soul of the animal by giving it a better body. Actually no, I'm memorizing this month another verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam that deals with the question of Arjuna's killing. And let me see if I can remember it. Let's say, it goes like this, it goes, Vijaya Rata Hata Atatotre Haya no Drita Hai Rasamani Tatriakshaniye. God. I will look it up because it's hard for me to. So it's a great verse. Because what it's saying is that it's the next one. It's 1939. 1939. Bhagavati Ratirastu Nema Murksho Yam Iha Niriksha Hata Gata Swarupam. So this is a great warrior who was also on that battle. And he said, at the moment of my death, let my attraction be to Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. I concentrate my mind on the chariot driver of Arjuna, who stood with a whip in his right hand and a bridle rope in his left, who was very careful to give protection to Arjuna's chariot by all means. Those who saw him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attained their original forms after death. So all the people who died on the battle, because they died in the presence of God, they attained the spiritual world. And if they just died at home in the ordinary course of events, they would have had to suffer for all the sinful activities they performed. And these people who Arjuna was fighting against, they did certain things that were really bad. For one thing, they tried to poison Arjuna. Actually, the deal is like Arjuna and his brothers were the rightful heir of the throne, but their cousins wanted to take it over. Okay? So Arjuna was fighting with his cousins. So his cousins tried to kill his brother Bhima by poisoning him, and they tried to kill all 4 of his brothers and himself, Arjuna, by burning them alive in a house made of flammable material that they encouraged them to live in. And then they did something that's unthinkable, actually. You'd never hear this. In a government assembly, they tried to pull the clothes off of Arjuna's wife. You never hear anybody doing something like that low class in a government assembly. You know, that's like really bad. So Krishna, these people, they're not fit for government office. You know? they're arsonists, they're poison givers, and they're rapists, actually, because that you can count that as rape. So, because God is good, He wants good government, and these guys weren't qualified, and they weren't voluntarily stepping down, you know. So, because Arjuna was a righteous warrior, Krishna said, these guys, I'm getting rid of these guys. Anyway, if you fight, you get the credit for it. and Arjuna said, oh, okay, that's a deal. So the thing is that it sounds like, Arjuna is such a nice guy, doesn't want to fight, and then Krishna's trying to encourage him, but you have to understand the whole story behind it. These people definitely were not fit for government office, and they weren't stepping down, and they had to be kicked out, and that's the way that Krishna chose to do it. He could have chosen another way, but he wanted to give his devotee Arjuna the credit. So.
But when Arjuna puts them down, then immediately they get purified or something?
Yeah, they die and their soul goes back to the spiritual kingdom. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I told you the Lord's blessing.
The
So
Lord gives,
actually-
the Lord takes away.
So they were actually blessed, inconceivably. So I just wanted to briefly, so we talked about how this practice is a science. I just wanted to talk about, some of the theory and the practice. So the idea is that
Let's go to the theories.
that we are considered the marginal energy of God, and we can be influenced by the material energy of God or the spiritual energy of God. And when we take birth in this world, our default position is we're under the control of the material energy. So the idea is by performing these acts of devotion, we come under the control of the spiritual energy. And the main two, one I mentioned is to associate with highly advanced devotees of the Supreme Lord, and the other is to chant the holy names of the Lord, as we were doing in the form of the Hare Krishna mantra. And it's actually, there are actually many different names of God and many different traditions, and God knows all of His names, and God appreciates when any of His children chant His names in devotion. And so it's a very universal principle. Actually, in the Bible, it says 3 places, whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So it's a bona fide way of being saved, according to the Bible. And in Psalms, there's many verses about praising the name of the Lord with musical instruments. So it's something that's beyond traditions, Many the Mohammedans, the Islamic people, they have 100 names for Allah. In the Kabbalah, one rabbi told me there's 72 names for God, and apparently 2 of them are Hari and Rama, which are also names in the Vedic tradition. So, I talked to one Jewish person who verified one of them. I can't remember which one, but apparently they're both there. And then there's another verse that's relevant to the practice. It goes, Ata Shri Krishna Nama Dina Bhavad Krem Indriya Seva Mukhe Jivado Svayameva Sparatida. The name of God, the form of God, the activities of God, the philosophy of God even, can't be understood with our blunt material senses. But when one engages in devotional service, beginning with the tongue, one's senses are purified and the Supreme Lord can be experienced. So then it's described that the tongue has 2 functions. One is to vibrate. So when we chant the name of the Lord, we're engaging the tongue in the act of devotion, praising the name of the Lord. And when we eat food that's been offered to the Lord, we're engaging our tongue in that way. So if all we did if all we did was we chanted God's name and we offered food to God before we ate it, and then we only ate food that we took the trouble to offer to God first. Those two things actually are powerful enough so that you could actually come to the point of experiencing God with your senses. So we promote these principles to associate with people who are completely dedicated to developing their devotion to God and to praising the name of the Lord and eating food that's first offered to God. In the Gita, Krishna recommends offering a vegetarian food. So we just offer vegetarian food. So usually we do some chanting at the end, then we have some of this food we've been talking about. So does anybody have any questions about that? Yes?
He has one first.
Okay.
Okay, you brought up the soul and particle physics earlier. So I guess my question is the soul or the spirit, whatever you want to call it, is it made of physical particles?
No, it's another energy. It's a spiritual energy. And it's also not something that, it can't be measured materially. It's described, the soul as 1/10,000th the tip of a hair in size. But it's also described as being invisible. So even though it has a size, it's not something, you can't bounce light off the soul and see. But it's also described as being luminous, though. That if you were like completely free from material contamination, you could see the luminosity in the soul. So it's sort of.
I can give you a comparison.
No, literally.
So you know when you close your eyes, but you straighten them closed, and then you open up and it's like a little fuzzy. That's the closest comparison to that.
No.
I don't know. But at any rate, the soul it has a size and it has it's described as being luminous, but it's not visible. And the property of the soul by which its presence is known is consciousness. So if something is conscious, then the soul is present. So some traditions they don't understand whether animals have souls or not, but we understand because animals have consciousness, they have souls, and also plants have consciousness too. Their just consciousness is lower.
Yeah.
And people have done studies on the consciousness of plants. So the soul is present, and the souls are all equal value, but they manifest more or less consciousness depending on the body that they're covered by, basically.
So is it kind of like concepts like the concept of faith? So we can have a shared idea of what faith is. Is that concept of faith kind of like the soul, where it's not made of any physical energy either, or it's not a manifestation of physical energy, or
it's another kind of energy. It's called a spiritual energy.
really? Okay.
And it can't be perceived by any material thing, but we can experience our own consciousness. So we're aware of our soul, and it's described that the soul is situated in the heart. So if you ask someone to point to themselves, usually they point to their heart.
Yeah.
They don't usually point to their head. They usually point because we have a sense that this is where I am.
Right
Yeah. So, and it said also that by performing the chakra yoga system, they can raise the soul up through the body and
Oh, really?
have it burst through the top of the head
Yeah.
and go to the spiritual world. So that's another thing. So it's floating in it's called the life air. So it's somehow there's a relationship. It's suspended and it can like that, and it's free of material contamination. It can contain the spiritual world, but a spiritual practice has to be performed to free the soul of material contamination. And it's recommended, like you're asking about sacrifice. So I was saying in previous ages those animal sacrifices were recommended, but in this age the only sacrifice which is recommended is the congregational chanting of the name of God. So, and that's the most powerful thing. Actually, it's the most degraded age, and we need the most powerful, sacrifice in the name of God. There's another verse that says that God has invested all His potency in His name, so that God is supremely powerful. So if we are protected by God, right, then no one could harm us. So if we actually really devote ourselves to the chanting of the holy name, we'll find that we can't be harmed. If people try to harm us, harm will come to them. Because we'll be protected, and there's different cases of that, actually. So, like, a lot of people are in anxiety about different government conspiracy theories, but if we take shelter of the holy name, that no matter how evil the government is, they won't be able to do anything to us. There's a story in our tradition about this person named Hiranyakashipu, and he was a great atheist, but his son was a great devotee, and his son kept talking about this all-powerful person who wasn't his father, but somebody else, namely God. And this sort of grated on him, because he was very arrogant. And he finally, and not only that, he was teaching theism to his classmates in the school, which was it was bad enough that he was a theist, but he was promoting this. So his father became so angry that he actually tried to kill his own son. He tried to throw him off a cliff. He tried to have him boiled in oil. He tried to have him trampled by elephants. He tried to have him poisoned. He tried, and in every instance he was protected by God, because he was always remembering God. There's different devotional activities that we promote. One is chanting, that we especially promote, but another one is worshiping, another one's offering prayers, and remembering is also one. So this son of this great tyrant, he attained perfection by remembering God. So he would just remember God in every circumstance, and he found himself protected from everything. And finally, his father was exasperated and said, "Where do you get your power from? Because I'm trying every way I can think of to kill you, and you're still alive." And then he said, "I get my power from the same person you get your power from, the Supreme Lord. There's only one source of all power." And of course that didn't make his father very happy. But so that if we actually fully apply these instructions that are given in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam that we hear from our gurus, that we can actually be that protected by the Supreme Lord. There's another person in our tradition named Haridas Thakur, and his family was Muslim, but he took up this chanting of Hare Krishna, which the Muslim government at that time identified as being a Hindu name of God. And they didn't like the fact that a Muslim was chanting a Hindu name of God, because they don't like anybody to convert from Muslim to anything else. And in Saudi Arabia, you can get the death penalty if you convert to something else. So, and the other ones are not quite, but they're not happy about it. So at that time, they would sentence people to be beaten to death, and they would beat them in the marketplace so that everybody could see. And after 3 or 4 marketplaces, the people would die. Right? So because Haridas wouldn't give up this chanting of this, what they considered a Hindu name of God, they decided to have him beaten to death. So they beat him in one marketplace after another, and he would keep chanting, and he would keep chanting, and he would be smiling and chanting, and they beat him in 22 marketplaces. 22? And he was still alive, and he was still chanting, and he was still smiling. And the people who were beating him, they were really upset, because they felt that they were going to be punished for their failure to kill him, And so when he heard that they're in anxiety, he said, no worries, I'll just die, and then you won't have to. So he actually went into samadhi, went into trance, and he appeared like lifeless, And the Muslim people, they bury the people, they're dead, but because he wasn't a proper Muslim, they didn't think he was good enough to be buried, so they threw him in the river, you know? And he floated down the river, and he came out of the river in the same place where they originally arrested him. And he went back to chanting, and they were pious enough to realize that he really was a man of God, because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to survive being beaten in 22 marketplaces. So they said, we don't like what you're doing, but we won't stop you from doing it. Because they couldn't stop him from doing it. But that, somebody who is like completely dedicated can actually get that level of protection.
Wow.
Which we would all like to be protected from the government, wouldn't we? So the last part of the program is we do a little more chanting, so we'll do a little more chanting. Would you like to lead us, Mr.? I don't like to lead both ones because it's...
You play Mridanga?
Yeah, I can play my one.
All right. How much time we got?
No more than half an hour.
Well, really, half an hour.
You know, our teacher Prabhupada, who came from India, he used to do programs at 22nd Avenue.
5 minutes.
Yeah. He used to do programs at 22nd Avenue. We actually still have a center there. We have Gita class on Saturday night if you're looking for an additional Gita class to go to. But when he would do his programs, he would sing for half an hour, and then he would talk for like 45 minutes, and then he would sing for half an hour. So if anyone gives me a chance, I try to do that. I will let Deva Damodara do as much as he wants. But he's from Ukraine. He's been practicing this for a number of years, at least 10, I don't know, 20 maybe. And he's much more better musician than I am. So.
Do you think that Hare Krishna is an Indian religion?
Well, it appeared in India, but there's evidence, according to the revealed literature, that it was spread all over the planet at a certain point, and then different parts of it broke off and became altered. You know, so it's according to the tradition, there was one culture on the planet 5,000 years ago. And you can find like Hindu deities in Mexico, you know, like archaeologists have found like Hanuman, which is famous Hindu. So
I've seen a pantheon of gods from like, I think it was the Mayans. They had their own, it was really interesting.
Yeah, actually many years ago, all these cultures, they believed that there are additional gods, you know. But there's one supreme God, and Krishna recommends worshiping the supreme God over all the other gods. Yeah. You had something to say?
No, I was gonna say like that's biblical too, because God does mention like there are other gods, just don't worship any other gods before me.
Right.
I am over them.
Yeah.
I basically supervise those gods, and they do my bidding.
Yeah.
Want to or not.
That's exactly what it says in Bhagavad Gita too. Those who worship the other gods, they're actually worshiping me, but in the wrong way.
It says before me, that means you can worship them,
You can
but
worship
I'm
them, just
number
don't.
one.
Yeah.
I come
I'm
before
number
all.
one. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good point.
We can't
Good
say
point.
that. You can't worship
You can't.
only
You never
me.
said you couldn't worship the other
Before
gods.
me.
You just said don't worship them before me.
Okay.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah. Ready to go. Okay. Deva Damodara. When did you encounter Krishna consciousness, Mr. Deva Damodara? More recently than 42 years ago.
Was that a great lecture? Huh? Let's give a round of applause for Krishna Kripa Prabhu. Whoever wants to hear more, he's actually, well, he's staying here. How long are you staying with us? Hear more?
Oh, I'm here to the 23rd, but then I come back on the 18th of December.
Okay, well, so he's every
I think
Monday.
class on Monday morning.
Well, yeah, well, I was just wanted to say that. Well, he's here every Monday. He gives a really nice class studying Srimad Bhagavatam, and we're going on Srimad Bhagavatam, really interesting Canva. And I actually want to
class at 26 Second Avenue this Saturday. If you ever want to visit that place, it's a very spiritual place. Yeah.
26 and 2nd?
No, 26 Second Avenue. It's between 1st and 2nd.
Oh,
You
okay.
take the F train and you get out of the 2nd Avenue side of the F train.
Okay, 26th Street?
No, 26 is the number.
Oh, 26 is the number, okay.
Between 1st and 2nd.
Is that uptown, downtown?
Downtown. It's 2nd Avenue on the F train.
Okay.
And then you get out of the 2nd Avenue side as opposed to the 1st Avenue side.
Okay.
that the Bhakti Center?
Oh, what time is it?
No, it's across it's the other side of the block from the Bhakti Center. It's when we sing at 5:30, the lecture is at 6, and then we have some food afterwards at 7:30.
Cool.
Okay. So before we chant, I also wanted to share. I was just reading Srimad Bhagavatam and found in the commentary this really interesting passage. Srila Prabhupada says, "One who adopts this method very skillfully attains perfection of life at once.
Wow.
And this perfection of human life is called Brahmagati, or the progressive march in spiritual existence." And then he says, there it is. Attainment of this perfection of life is easily available to a pure devotee of the Lord without his undergoing any difficult method of perfection. Such a devotional life is full of kirtanam, chanting, smaranam, listening, and ikshanam. What is ikshanam?
You're seeing the deity.
Seeing the deity, yes. So we have these beautiful deities. If you come in the morning for...
Ikshanam means to audience. Take the audience of the Lord in the temple.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
So if you come in the morning for Krishna Kripa's lecture and on Monday, you will also see the beautiful deities that we have. And then continuing on, and he says, as mentioned in the previous verse, and then he said, one must therefore adopt the simple way of devotional life in order to attain the highest perfection available in any category of human form of life in any part of the world.
Yeah.
And then in the end, he also says, again, repeating that, similarly, one should not be affected by the jugglery of karma kanda or jnana kanda or even gymnastic performances of yoga. So, like the karma, the jnana, like the path of doing like pious deeds and like sacrifices, or the jnana is like studying really deeply something just to understand, grapple with by the power of intelligence, or yoga, like doing some exercises. So Prabhupada says that we should not be baffled by that, should not be attracted. We should simply take to the performances of kirtanam, smaranam, under a bona fide spiritual master, without any difficulty attain the highest perfection.
And smaranam's remembering, so that's how that Prahlad attained perfection, so his father couldn't kill him just by remembering that.
So part of the kirtanam is also smaranam, because when we sing the kirtan, if we hear attentive enough, and we strive to repeat the same melody, because essentially the melody is the mood, is the taste of some sort of relationship with Krishna. And some people can, when singing, they can bring it forward more. Some people can bring it forward less. Some devotees, but at the same time, if we listen attentive enough, that can bring us to the deep level of meditation and concentration. Because while singing, we're like most of our senses are engaged and our mind becomes pacified. But that only works when we are really concentrated on the practice.
That's true.
So let's do that. We have like 20 more minutes, and
It's up to you, just no more than half an hour.
around like.
Please don't make this longer than.
Well, the prasadam is usually ready like 8:45, right? So.
Just
Oh, we use
start
this later?
If you feel like dancing.
Hare
Thank you everybody for such an enthusiastic dancing. Chanting. Prasadam. We have like this every morning actually. So whoever wants more is welcome. Different time slots are available. Starting 4:30, 7:30. 12:30 actually, we need something. I didn't
Go grab the dinner!
Anthony's feet, bro.
She's gonna come back.
Thank you for dancing. Very nice.